Welcome back, one and all, to Mystic Radio. I am your host, Spirit Lady Robin Alexis. Remember, Mystic Radio is always an experience, not an explanation. It is up to you to discern if what you hear rings true to you or not. We are not telling you what to think. We are just encouraging you to know, trust, and act upon your own knowing. So, what is so intriguing that I started to bring back Mystic Radio? Extraterrestrials, UFOs, other spirits, and my new very special friend, Ken Sylvester. Ken and I met in a really cool way. My book, A Conversation with Extraterrestrials, became a bestseller on Amazon, and his was a bestseller before mine, so I bought it and read it, and I was totally blown away by his information that he has. So I was able to acquire his phone number, and I was lucky enough he returned my call. And once Ken and I started having these conversations, I just knew that the Mystic Radio community would love to hear from Ken and I and ETs and goodness knows what else. We're already learning that Ken has one-of-a-kind, brand-new information about some actually very old, original UFO stories. Last week we were speaking about Roswell. That's Roswell, New Mexico. But before I bring Ken on and he tells us more about Roswell and the Men in Black, I want to remind you that you can find Ken's book by going to Amazon and search for the book We're Not Alone and Here's the Proof by Ken Sylvester. And you can find my book, A Conversation with Extraterrestrials by Robin Alexis, also on Amazon and elsewhere. Welcome, Ken.
Welcome back, Robin.
Yes, I love the conversation that you started last week about Roswell. First of all, I had no idea that there were ships seen before the actual Roswell, New Mexico incidences were reported and then debunked. And I had no idea that there was more than one ship. So you just fed us all kinds of new information last week. Where would you like to start this week telling us about Roswell?
Well, I'd like to finish part of the story that I wasn't able to complete last week on Roswell, and then tell you about some of the cover stories that the government has put out since the existence of Roswell, and then a little bit more about the Men in Black and some descriptions of some of the things they've done to intimidate witnesses and keep them quiet and keep them to hold secrets for 30, 40, 50 years.
Unimaginable, but then it's not at the same time. I mean, I can't wait to share some of the experiences I've had now that I feel more safe to talk about them, especially with you, Ken. You are so comfortable to speak with about this, so please do go on.
All right. First, also, I'd like to put out just a little warning to people that do end up observing if you do see a UFO. One thing is, through the biological effects, many people that have got too close to a UFO have got radiation burns and suffered terrible health consequences for the rest of their life. Most of them end up dying of cancer. And so when you see a UFO, just like they warn you after your power goes out, it's just like a down power line. You do not want to get too close to a UFO. You're going to be curious. Sure, it landed. It'd be great to meet aliens, and hopefully they're friendly. But you could endanger yourself just by getting close to the ship. So this is just a small advance warning in case one day you do encounter them, to be cautious and not to put your life at stake. The pictures you take, they'll last a lifetime, and so will you being able to tell the story. So you just want to avoid. Should you encounter a UFO or an alien that happens to be by. Now, back to the rest of the story on Roswell. Jesse Marcel got a call from the sheriff's office after Matt Brazel went in and brought some evidence of what happened at Roswell. He took him into the local sheriff's office. The sheriff then called the base. Jesse Marcel was in charge, and he was dispatched out to the crash site. He started picking up debris, and one of the most debatable things that's been out there is that he picked up a sheet that looked like aluminum foil, except he could crumble it up into a ball, and it would rebound to its original shape. They tried to say that this was just evidence that it was a balloon, a weather balloon, but then they did a comparison test, and they had a couple witnesses that had picked up debris to pick up various samples of metal. When they got to the ones from the weather balloon, both witnesses said this definitely was not what they picked up. So again, the government, as the cover story, had used that weather balloon, yet there was debris scattered over an entire square mile that took a busload of staff from the military, from the base, the entire day to pick up, and they still had more debris that got picked up. So that was a discovery, the crumbled foil that turned back into just, like I say, it looked like aluminum foil. And then the government developed, the first cover story was that this was a weather balloon. And they left that out there for a while, and sometimes they seem like they're testing to see the reaction. The next was that this was possibly that the Nazis, after World War II, the scientists, we recruited most of them, but the Soviet Union got their share of scientists also. Now, the Nazis had been rumored of developing their own flying saucers. They show old black and white clips of some flying saucers they developed, and most of them didn't look like they worked. But they thought that it was possible that when they went to the Soviet Union at the time, that the Russians were able, with their scientists, along with what they knew, might have developed some type of technology, and that the UFO that was seen in Roswell was really a flying saucer developed by a combination of the Russians and ex-Nazi scientists. But of course, that's debunked by the many things that have been found out there that just don't match up. Another one, and this one just came out recently. In fact, I belong to MUFON. It's a civil organization, a civilian organization that studies UFOs. They send an investigative team out and they first try and debunk it, and then they try to prove it. And this organization is the Mutual UFO Network. They're now, I think, worldwide. I joined 2 years ago, and they put out a monthly magazine. Well, in the August issue, they published an article, and I don't have the gentleman's name because we debunked the story, but they put in there that it was, again, a sophisticated weather balloon, not just a regular weather balloon. It was called Project Mogul, M-O-G-U-L, Mogul Project. And the balloon was supposed to be able to measure the atmosphere, and the claim was that we wanted to use these balloons to see if we could detect any radiation in the atmosphere from the Soviets testing nuke bombs. So that was quickly debunked in the next month issue, and I don't have, and for readers, maybe next time I can get a hold of that article and how they debunked it. But the balloon story just doesn't fly anymore.
So basically, you're saying even in 2024, a MUFON magazine is debunking the Roswell UFO stories from 1947?
Not exactly. The debunking got done by readers who had studied. There was a group of UFO researchers that had studied, 4 or 5 of them that had been studying the Roswell event, and they knew a lot of facts that I didn't even cover today on debunking the weather balloon. And they presented their arguments in the next month and said they were surprised that MUFON would even publish such a parent cover story that's coming up here, 77 years later. But again, the government goes to great lengths. As I had said before, they're on the WIT, whatever it takes. And they'll use whatever disinformation can be thrown out there to distract or distort or for UFO researchers to become confused. and they continue to do that. So here we see a new story out 77 years later that they're still trying to say that it was a balloon.
So, you've spoken to us several times about these observables that the government has put out to help us to know for ourselves if we've seen a UFO. Do any of these observables fit the category of a weather balloon?
Oh, definitely not. But nobody saw the crash, so they couldn't identify the speed or any one of the 6 observables. They found it after it crashed.
Wow, it sure would be nice to talk to the pilots who saw the ships the night before and ask them if the ships matched up with the observables.
Well, Kenneth Arnold did. He said he estimated the speed of the UFOs he saw at 1,600 miles per hour.
Wow.
So what they did is he took 2 points from point A to point B. They measured that distance and figured out that actually he was very close. He had said it was 1,600 miles per hour, and after they took and did the math on it, it came out to it was around 1,500 miles an hour. And in 1947, we didn't have anything that could do 1,500 miles an hour.
Well, and it doesn't sound like we had a sophisticated weather balloon like that either. But so this Kenneth Arnold was the pilot the night before the Roswell crash.
It actually was about 10 days before in June.
Oh, 10 days before. Okay. So
yeah, June 24th is the date that I found through the research, and so that was about 10 days before Roswell occurred.
Okay.
But they were in the area. And also that day, in fact, according to the FBI, they had confirmed 12 reports of UFOs sighted during that time all over the world.
And so one would question again, now that we have these observables that we didn't have before, if it would have fit the criteria, which we have our opinion, but it certainly would be nice to be able to measure it with the observables that we have today. Now, and I got a little confused following the story. So there's 2 ships that came to Roswell, and one crashed and one did not. Is that accurate?
No, they both crashed.
Okay. They did
but
both crash.
But the first ship, which EB-1 was on, was fully intact because they were able to pass that on to Jesse Marcel to reverse engineer later. It was just wedged into the ground, and it did not have damage. The second ship was the one that landed at after Corona at the plains of Augustin. That ship was destroyed. It was not flyable, and the dead aliens were laying out on the ground outside the ship. That was not. But the first one, they were able, because he was able to go back in and retrieve a communication device that he was able to use to communicate with his planet. So they were able to get a lot of the technology from the ship that was intact.
Okay.
And they're still not sure what caused the ship to crash, the second ship. And even the first ship wasn't exactly a smooth landing, but they got luckier when they landed. There's, out in that area of the desert where they test the nukes, they were trying out a new microwave radar that was a high-tech thing, high attitude, and they think that may have caused some interruption in their electronic devices and is what caused them to crash, because they've had that happen at other places where this radar has been installed.
Well, that matches with what I did channel from one of the extraterrestrials from the Roswell incident. And I will speak, or let them speak through me in another show. I don't want to do that right now. I want to finish up with the Roswell information because there's so much of it, like you said, and there's more information being revealed all the time. And Ken, you have the most up-to-date. What else do you want to share with us about the Roswell, New Mexico stories?
Well, most of the highlighted details, the important details, have been covered. I could go into backstories about the information about the witnesses, but I didn't put them in the book, and for the reason that it was too much information and it didn't make a difference as to the outcome of what happened out in Roswell.
Well, as you
but I would like to talk more about the men in black.
Okay, before you get to that, I want to ask you a question, and you
Sure.
may not want to talk about that this on this show or not. But as you were doing the research for this show and last week's show, did you have, what was that experience like for you? And did you have any sort of contact or feeling that somebody was guiding you?
Actually, Robin, since I started writing the book, I had so many things that seemed coincidental. I'll give you one, for instance. I was writing about Socorro, and I had finished the story, and it was going to be sent for editing. And then I went to the TV, and that night, and this is back in May of this year, shortly before I published the book, Josh Gates and his team went to Socorro to investigate. And they weren't able to, because it's been so long, they couldn't, recover any new evidence. They didn't see any UFOs, why they were out at Socorro. But they brought this scientist on, and this scientist produced a supposed document from the government that the landing at Socorro was not an alien spaceship. The cover story on this one, and this was a new one, was that it was a helicopter that had been adapted to have a landing gear for landing on the moon. And they showed a picture of it, and it looked nothing like the description that was done by the sheriff, who was within 20 feet of that landing in Socorro. And the way he described the ship, plus the evidence left behind, in Socorro, there was a burnt-out grass from the shape of the ship. Where the landing gear came down, there were 4 6x12 petals, left an impression in the ground from the weight of it. And the ship on its way down, landing, had burned some greasewood bushes, and they still were smoldering when they came out there to examine the evidence. And further proof that this was an actual landing, Dr. Ellen Hynek, who at that time was working for Project Blue Book, was sent to investigate. And for the first time, and he had been doing UFO research investigation for about 20 years, he said, this is not a hoax. I think this is for real. And he went back to Project Blue Book and tried to get them to adapt to change and tell the truth, and they didn't want to. They wanted to, their job was to deny and come up with the best cover story that seemed to fit, and then they would put that cover story. So shortly after that, Dr. Alan Hynek, who happens to be from Michigan, he quit, and he started being an independent UFO researcher. And that was just with the one landing at Socorro. It was a brief landing, and that's the one where I described earlier, where 2 Ebens were in there, and they weren't supposed to even land at Socorro. They then landed briefly, got back in, and actually the sheriff was also able to describe the aliens, because as he was watching them walk back to the ship, one of them turned around, and he could see that it had non-human features and was only about 4 foot tall. And they also found footprints going back to the ship that matched the size of the Ebens, which were about between 42 inches and 48 inches, somewhere between 3.5 and 4 feet high. The scientists said, well, you simply just saw a couple humans, but it was not a spaceship, it was this helicopter. And so I debunked it with my own evidence, and that was back in May of this year that it was on there. And normally Josh Gates is very thorough. I tried to email him, but I wasn't able to get a response with my evidence, and wanted to meet with him and compare his evidence as to where this scientist got this document. And why would they hold the document if that's all it was, a top secret project that's no longer top secret from back in the 60s? Why would they not have come up with that document sooner to debunk the story?
So this is very interesting. And what I'm hearing you say, there's a pattern that when you, as you've done your research for the book and this podcast, you have synchronistic things occur. Like you'll go to the television and all of a sudden it has the same subject that you're researching.
Yes, in fact, it happened the other night. When I was writing down some notes on Roswell, and I pre-record all my shows so I don't have to watch them with commercials. I have pre-recorded a Star Trek episode from what was called Deep Space Nine. It's about a space station that's out in outer space, and they don't often leave the space station. It's more incoming traffic. Well, there was a alien race that they called Ferengis, and two of the Ferengis had decided to make a trip to Earth. So I recorded the show earlier in the day. I finished writing about Roswell around 11:20 p.m. I went into my living area, and the show that I recorded earlier about the two Ferengis coming to Earth was playing. So it was in the middle of it, so I reversed it and got to the start, and I pressed the information button to description of it, and it gave a further description. And it said, on their way on a trip to Earth, they crash landed at Roswell in 1947.
Well,
and this happened so many times that I didn't, I just put it off as coincidence, of course. But it happened. It happened probably 100 times while I was doing this. So I always felt somebody was helping me out or guiding me and leading me down this path. I thought it might have even been your friend that talked about Bashar. And
yes.
So I'm just saying in my head as I'm sitting there, because I felt something, a presence. I said, look, if this is Bashar, I said, why don't you help me out a little bit? If you want me to tell your story, why don't you guide me a little bit? Then I found I was directed to the internet, and that's when I went on, and I found the new information about the second witness that was from the second crash, which was at the the new plains of Augustin. And it had the story about the guy who had waited 60 years. So this was just out recently. And so that's where I got directed to. So, yeah, I feel that I've been guided all along here to finding, when I seek the information, it would be there.
Well, that's the true joy of having met you, too. There was a very synchronistic thing that occurred, which we'll share with people at some point. But as Ken's mentioning Bashar, one night I was talking to him, and all of a sudden this extraterrestrial started channeling through me. And so Ken asked him what his name was, and he said his name was Bashar. So we hung up and Googled the name Bashar, and come to find out, evidently he speaks to quite a few people who can speak ET language. So I'm sure Bashar will be visiting this show occasionally. And I do want to say that I have been speaking with an extraterrestrial who says she crashed in Roswell in 1947. She was not evidently from this other ship where EB1 came from, because I never even heard about that until I spoke with Ken. On another show, we'll see if Errol or EB1 or J-Rod or Bashar want to come through and speak. But we're not going to do that just yet. What I'd like to do now, Ken, is have you tell a few stories about the Men in Black.
Okay. Pretty much in all the cover-up stories, which was pretty much everything in the book, the Men in Black show up. They were always deployed to go there and stop people from going to the newspaper or going to the media and spreading their story around. I'm going to give you one example, and this happened in Brazil. In 1996, a ship crashed in Brazil. I don't even remember the story from 96. they found a live alien. It was from the reptilian family, and that story quickly died. Then, in 2022, 26 years later, a guy named James Fox, who is a journalist, UFO researcher, one of the most well-known in the world, did a documentary. So he went back to Brazil. He recruited a local crew for filming and to aid him, and then he went out and started re-interviewing witnesses. And the witnesses still were hard to find. They had been in hiding for 26 years because they all had been told by the men in black that if they said anything, there would be severe consequences. So the first guy that came to the crash site was Carlos de Silva. He arrived, he saw the ship, and also the other reason they were keeping this secret is the United States was testing out a new laser, and they shot a hole in the side of the ship. He could see the hole in the ship and smoke pouring out and knew it was going to crash soon. So he followed it to where it crashed and got out of his car and started looking around and was finding the same debris like Roswell. They found the same type metal, but he only had 5 minutes because the military showed up in force. I mean, dozens of armed guys jump out of their Jeeps and trucks, surround him with pointed guns in his chest, and tell him, we order you to leave here right now and never speak of this again. Now, they got there so fast because they were tracking this on NORAD, and they also knew that they took a shot at it, so there was a good chance that it was going to crash. They followed it on the NORAD radar, and that's why they were able to show up in 5 minutes. So this guy now is extremely scared after, being rifles pointed in his chest, so he leaves. He goes to a gas station, and sure enough, as he gets out of the car, he's approached by 2 men in black again. And they said, let me tell you what we know. We know your name. We know the name of all your family members. We know where you live. And if you ever talk about this again, there will be severe consequences to this. So he kept that secret. That put him in fear, and that's why he kept the secret for 26 years. The first thing he did, and I also suggest to all our viewers to check out my sources and my evidence and see it for yourself, because the documentary put out by James Fox, when you see the video of these witnesses being interviewed, you get more of an impact as to their intensity. This guy started crying and said, I've held this in my brain for 26 years. It's caused me anxiety, depression, lack of sleep, and I thank you for doing this because I had to tell my story, and I'm glad that you finally let me get out my story. That was just one thing that happened in Brazil. The second thing that happened is originally the alien was found by 3 teenage girls. They were walking around, nothing to do, and they came across this wall, cinder block wall, that had graffiti written on it. It caught their attention. They looked over there, and they spotted this reptilian who was hunched down and was injured and had telepathically told them, I need help, okay? I won't harm you, but I've been injured and I need help. And he also wasn't used to our temperatures. Being a reptilian, it was too hot. He was sweating profusely. The 3 girls ran away. They were scared. They went back home and told their mom, because this reptilian was a brown-skinned reptilian with bright red eyes. They thought they saw the devil. They didn't have any idea that this was an alien. They were brought up in a Catholic family, had strict religious beliefs, and they thought it was the devil. So they took their mom back to where they saw the alien, and the alien had disappeared. Now, when the men in black came to their house, they threatened the girls and told them that they had to change their story, that they could not put this story out. And the mother said, look, we are a good Catholic family. I'm not going to tell my girls to change their story. So when James Fox goes back 26 years later, these teenagers are now in their 40s and their 50s. They recount the entire story to him and tell him that just recently after that, the men in black show up again, and they come in with a briefcase, and they open the briefcase, and it's got probably $250,000 in it in currency, and they say, okay, if you guys will change your story and move out of Brazil and never talk about this again, you can have this money. And the mother again reiterated, no, the girls are telling the truth. I'm not going to ask them to change their story. And she literally kicked them out of the house.
Wow. Well, on that note, we are going to have to come to the close of this particular Mystic Radio with Rob and Alexis and special guest Ken Sylvester. Next show, next week, Wednesday at noon, we will be discussing, come to find out, Maxwell, the extraterrestrial eye channel in my book, A Conversation with Extraterrestrials. He wants to talk live on the air. And then we'll also see if some of these other extraterrestrials that Ken's been speaking about who had showed up in Roswell, we'll see if they want to talk, and maybe even Bashar. And who knows what else will happen on that show. So if you're enjoying this Mystic Radio series with Ken and myself, I again encourage you to learn more about our books on Amazon. You can find Ken's book by putting in We're Not Alone and Here's the Proof by Ken Sylvester. And again, my book is A Conversation with Extraterrestrials by Robin Alexis. Thank you so much for joining our show. And of course, you are always invited to my website, robinalexis.com. You can learn more about my one-on-one phone readings, my personalized Reiki healing weeks, the online soul spa, and the blogs that I do. And remember, everybody, choose love and stay tuned to Mystic Radio Wednesdays at noon, and let life's mysteries unfold. Thank you for another great show, Ken.
Thank you, Robin.